morning. I'm Pastor Allen, and we're looking at Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16, and this is the parable or the story of the workers in the vineyard. And Jesus tells this story. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. Okay, that last verse, verse 16, we just saw that yesterday at the end of the rich man not willing to give up his wealth to enter the kingdom of God. And that was Matthew 19, verse 30. It said, "But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first." And right here in chapter 20, Jesus is giving a practical lesson. He is showing that in action, and then he reminds us in verse 16 that's exactly what he's doing. How he begins, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into the vineyard." Okay, so here's the kingdom of God. It's like a landowner who hires some workers. He says, "This is what I'm going to pay you. Go out and work in my field," and they do. Well, about 9 in the morning, he still has opportunity for other workers, so he goes and brings them in. And he tells them, "You can also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. As we read, in the beginning, the first workers agreed to work for a denarius. And at the end of the day, the workers who came in last and only worked for about an hour were also paid a denarius. And here it says about 9 in the morning he went out and got workers, and it says, "I will pay you whatever is right." So a denarius was the day's wages. And then he went out about noon to get more workers, and he went out about 3. And about 5 in the afternoon, there are still others standing around, and he says, "Why have you been standing here all day?" And they said, "Because no one has hired us." And he says, "You go also and work in my vineyard." there's lots of opportunity in God's kingdom because Jesus has paid the price. So there's plenty of room, there's plenty of opportunity. You've got to be willing to take advantage of the opportunity when it presents itself. In verse 8, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." And so the ones that were hired at 5 come, get their denarius, and they go. And the ones standing in line, further back, because they were the first ones, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna make out if the guys that only worked an hour and we were here all day and we worked really hard and the sun was hot, we're gonna make out." But remember, the landowner agreed to pay them a denarius. And so when they get up there and after working all day, he pays them a denarius, which is what he agreed to pay them, they begin grumbling. They're not happy about that. It says in verse 13, "But he answered one of them, 'Am I not being unfair to you, friend? Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have a right to do what I want with my money? Or are you envious because I'm being so generous?'" Very interesting. And that's true. He does have a right to do with what he wants with his money. So do we. So does everybody. That's a principle of God. You have the money, you make the choices, and other people may not be happy. The other thing is this is directed at the Jewish people of the day. They thought because they were God's chosen people and they had been, following God for all of the Old Testament, they had a special place of privilege. But the workers that were hired last are the Gentiles. It's us. We haven't had the opportunity that the Jewish people have had, but God is giving us a great opportunity. He is being generous to us through Jesus Christ. And so he's allowing us to come into the kingdom of God just like he's allowing the Jewish people to come in. And there's no difference. He treats everybody the same with generosity. That's one thing we need to remember. That's why when he talks about the last will be first, because we're the last. We were outside of God's kingdom, outside of God's community. The Jewish people were always a part of it. And so they were the first ones. They were the first believers from Moses and Exodus all up through the Old Testament. And then now that Jesus is here, things are going to change. The kingdom is going to be expanded. It's not only going to include Jewish believers, but it's going to include the Gentile or the non-Jewish believers. And that's us. And we are coming into the kingdom. We are coming into God last. But God has promised that we have a place in the kingdom and he will treat us the same.